The morning sun cast a warm, golden light over the cobblestone streets of Charleston, South Carolina, illuminating the charm of its historic architecture and the vibrant energy of a city waking up. James Whitmore, a man accustomed to the sterility of corporate boardrooms and the polished sheen of glass skyscrapers, found this quaint, bustling corner of Charleston a rare comfort. For the past 2 months, he had carved out a quiet ritual in his otherwise rigid schedule. A stop at Magnolia Cafe, an unassuming coffee shop nestled between rows of ivy-clad townhouses. James entered the cafe with a subtle nod to the bell above the door, its soft chime lost in the murmur of morning conversations. The air was rich with the scent of roasted coffee and freshly baked scones, mingling with the distant sound of street performers tuning their instruments outside. This place was worlds away from his usual life, a place where no one asked about quarterly earnings or rising stocks. Here he wasn't James Whitmore, billionaire tech mogul. He was just a man who enjoyed a latte and a corner seat by the window. He adjusted his jacket as he walked toward his usual table, his gaze naturally drawn to the barista behind the counter. Anna Bellamont moved with a quiet efficiency, her movements unhurried but purposeful as she greeted customers. There was something magnetic about her, a warmth that radiated from her smile, one that felt genuine in a way James found increasingly rare. He watched as she handed a steaming mug to an elderly woman seated near the window, her voice soft and reassuring. "Mrs. Hughes, you let me know if you need anything else, all right?" Anna said, crouching slightly to meet the woman's eyes. Mrs. Hughes, whose frail hands trembled as she adjusted the scarf around her neck, gave a grateful nod. "Thank you, dear. You're too kind." James averted his gaze, feeling a pang of guilt for observing the exchange so intently. It wasn't like him to linger on such moments, but Anna had a way of making even the smallest interactions seem profound. He knew better than to let himself get attached to people, places, or even routines. Yet, as he took his seat and glanced at his phone, he realized he had already broken his own rules. At precisely 7:45 a.m., as always, Anna approached his table, a steaming latte in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," she greeted, her smile warm but professional. "The usual?" "Yes, thank you," James replied, his voice steady yet restrained. He tried to return her smile, but it came out awkward, almost forced. For weeks now, this had been their ritual, a quiet exchange that felt as though it carried more weight than it should. Anna lingered for a moment, her hand brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, before returning to the counter. James's gaze followed her briefly before he shook his head, forcing himself to focus on the world outside the cafe's window. James sipped his latte slowly, savoring the warmth that cut through the slight chill of the morning. Outside, Charleston's streets buzzed with life, cyclists weaving through traffic, vendors setting up stalls, and locals greeting one another with cheerful familiarity. This rhythm of community was something he had rarely experienced in his world, where every conversation seemed like a transaction, and trust came with a steep price. From his vantage point, James could see Anna moving deftly behind the counter, her attention shifting effortlessly from customers to the coffee machine. She greeted everyone with the same enthusiasm, whether they were regulars or first-time visitors. Her energy seemed boundless, yet there was a quiet determination beneath her cheerful demeanor, a purpose he couldn't quite define but found deeply intriguing. His thoughts were interrupted by the familiar sound of a voice nearby. "Mr. Whitmore." He turned to see Charlotte, his younger sister, standing by his table. Her sharp navy blazer and perfectly styled hair made her look every inch the high-powered lawyer she was. She slid into the seat across from him without waiting for an invitation, her expression equal parts amused and exasperated. "Still hiding out here, I see," she teased, glancing toward the counter, where Anna was busy serving another customer. You've been coming here a lot lately. Care to explain? James leaned back in his chair, his expression carefully neutral. It's quiet. I like the coffee. Charlotte smirked, clearly unconvinced. Right. It has nothing to do with the waitress who knows your order by heart. He didn't respond immediately, letting her comment hang in the air. His sister had a knack for cutting through his defenses, but he wasn't ready to admit what even he wasn't sure of. I'm just here to enjoy a cup of coffee, he said finally, his tone measured. Not everything has to be analyzed. Charlotte sighed, her teasing demeanor giving way to something more serious. James, I'm not saying you need to start spilling your life story to strangers, but don't you think it's time you let someone in? You've been carrying that chip on your shoulder for years now. Maybe it's time to move on. James's jaw tightened, her words striking closer to home than he cared to admit. I'm fine, Charlotte. Really, I don't need a lecture. Fine, she relented, holding up her hands in mock surrender. But don't say I didn't warn you. The longer you shut people out, the harder it'll be to let them in. With that, she stood, adjusting the strap of her leather bag over her shoulder. Before leaving, she cast one last glance toward Anna, who was now helping a young mother calm her crying toddler. You might be fine, James, but she seems like the kind of person who doesn't give up on people. Just something to think about. As Charlotte disappeared through the cafe's door, James turned his attention back to his latte, though his thoughts were anything but settled. His sister's words clung to him, each one a challenge to the careful walls he had spent years constructing. Across the room, Anna glanced in his direction, her gaze lingering just a moment longer than usual. She offered a polite smile before returning to her work, leaving James to wonder if Charlotte was right, if he was holding onto his past too tightly to see the possibilities unfolding right in front of him. For the first time in years, James felt the faintest flicker of curiosity about what might happen if he took a step outside the carefully controlled world he had built. But with curiosity came fear, the fear of repeating past mistakes, of opening himself up, only to find that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. As he finished his coffee and stood to leave, he made a mental note to return tomorrow. Perhaps this time he might find the courage to say more than a simple thank you. After all, there was something about Anna Bellamont, something real and uncalculated, that made him want to stay just a little longer. James adjusted his cufflinks as he stepped into the elevator of his high-rise office building, his reflection staring back at him from the polished steel walls. The city's morning hustle and bustle played out beyond the elevator's glass back, but his mind was elsewhere. The fleeting warmth of the cafe and the vibrant energy of its people felt a world away from the stark corporate reality he inhabited. The doors slid open with a soft chime, and he was greeted by the familiar hum of keyboards and muted conversations. His assistant, Amanda, fell into step beside him, rattling off updates about the day's agenda, meetings with stakeholders, reports on the latest technology rollout, and a dinner with potential investors. James gave a curt nod, acknowledging her efficiency, but his thoughts drifted back to the cafe and to Anna. It wasn't like him to linger on anyone. He'd spent years carefully maintaining emotional distance, a lesson he'd learned the hard way. Trust, he'd come to believe, was a commodity far too easily exploited. As he settled into the sleek leather chair behind his desk, his gaze shifted to a photo on the corner of his desk. It was an old picture of him and Charlotte, taken during one of their father's infamous business retreats. They had been smiling, carefree, unaware of the lessons life would soon impose. The sharp knock at his door jolted him back to the present. Charlotte entered without waiting for a reply, a folder in hand and her trademark no-nonsense expression firmly in place. "You look distracted," she said, setting the folder down on his desk. "I'd ask if it's work, but I have a feeling it's something or someone else." James sighed, leaning back. Do you ever stop analyzing me? Not when I'm right, she quipped, pulling up a chair. So, what is it? The cafe waitress? He gave her a pointed look, but she pressed on. Look, James, I know you've had your reasons for keeping people at arm's length. I've watched you build walls around yourself since, well, you know. He didn't need her to finish. He knew exactly what she meant. Charlotte's veiled reference to the time when their family friend had not only stolen from their father, but also fractured their trust in ways that left permanent scars. James had been young, barely 16, but the betrayal had left its mark. It was the first in a series of experiences that taught him the cost of trusting the wrong people. Charlotte, it's not that simple, he replied, his tone measured. You know what happened with Greg, and before him with her. Ah, yes, she said, her voice softening. Charlotte Daniels, the woman who only loved you for what you could give her. You've been carrying those wounds around like armor ever since. But not everyone is like them, James. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, James felt the weight of their truth. But as quickly as the vulnerability surfaced, he buried it again. I can't afford to make the same mistake, he said firmly, though his conviction faltered as he spoke. I won't risk it. Charlotte studied him for a moment before leaning forward. You're not risking anything, James. You're losing everything by doing nothing. Think about that. With that, she stood, leaving him to stare at the folder she'd placed on his desk. Inside were updates on the latest projects at Sterling Technologies, but the words blurred as his mind returned to Anna, her laugh, and the way she lit up while helping others. James exhaled, leaning back in his chair as the day outside brightened. The world carried on, and so did the persistent pull of curiosity that refused to be ignored. James couldn't shake Charlotte's words as the day stretched on, the usual cadence of meetings and reports blending into background noise. By the time he returned to his penthouse that evening, the sprawling city skyline seemed colder, more detached than ever. He placed his briefcase by the door, loosened his tie, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Charleston. The city was alive with lights and movement, but James felt none of its energy. Instead, he thought about the cafe, the warm laughter that seemed to echo even in the quietest moments, and Anna's voice as she reassured the elderly woman that morning. Her presence had been unassuming, yet it lingered in his thoughts in a way few things ever had. He poured himself a drink and sat on the edge of the couch, the glass cold against his fingertips. Memories he'd long buried began to surface unbidden, starting with Greg. The man had been a family friend, someone his father trusted implicitly to help expand their fledgling business. But Greg had betrayed that trust, stealing not only money, but also the confidence James's father had instilled in him. At 16, James had watched his father rebuild from scratch, carrying the weight of that betrayal like a silent burden. It had shaped James's worldview, teaching him that trust was a fragile thing best withheld. And then there was Charlotte Daniels. She'd been everything he thought he wanted. Charming, ambitious, and utterly enamored with him, or so he believed. It wasn't until after their engagement fell apart that he realized she'd been more enamored with his bank account than anything else. The humiliation of that realization had been a private one, but its impact had been lasting. He'd learned to guard himself fiercely, and until now, that had served him well. But Anna was different. She didn't seem to want anything from him, and that unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. It wasn't just her kindness or her energy. It was the way she made him question the barriers he'd erected around himself. The ring of his phone broke through his thoughts. He glanced at the screen and saw Charlotte's name flashing. With a resigned sigh, he answered. "You're thinking about her, aren't you?" she asked without preamble. James didn't bother denying it. "You're relentless, you know that? I'm also your sister, which means it's my job to call you out when you're being an idiot," she replied. Her voice softened. "Look, James, I'm not saying you should dive headfirst into anything, but maybe, just maybe, you could stop assuming everyone is out to hurt you." "Easier said than done," he muttered, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Charlotte paused, her tone shifting. "You know, Dad used to say the same thing after Greg betrayed him. He thought he could never trust anyone again. But he rebuilt, James. He found people who believed in him, and he learned to believe in himself again. You can too." James leaned forward, her words settling over him like a weight he couldn't shake. "It's not that simple." "Maybe not," Charlotte admitted. "But if you keep waiting for life to be simple, you'll be waiting forever. Just think about it, okay?" The line went dead before he could respond, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the quiet hum of the city outside. For the first time in years, James felt something he hadn't expected, the urge to take a chance. The next morning, he found himself back at Magnolia Cafe. The familiar chime of the bell above the door greeted him, and his eyes instinctively searched for Anna. She was behind the counter, laughing softly as she handed a coffee to a young boy and his mother. When she turned and saw him, her smile lit up her face. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," she said, her tone as warm as ever. "The usual?" James hesitated for a moment before nodding. But as he watched her prepare his latte, he made a silent decision. Maybe Charlotte was right. Maybe it was time to stop letting the past dictate his future. When Anna set his drink down in front of him, he met her gaze, and for the first time, let himself hold it. "Thank you," he said, his voice quieter than usual. And then, after a pause, "How's the community center doing?" The question caught Anna off guard, but her expression quickly softened. "It's struggling," she admitted. "But we're trying. Every little bit helps." James nodded, his mind already turning over possibilities. For once, he didn't feel the familiar weight of hesitation. Instead, he felt something closer to resolve. As he sipped his coffee, he made a quiet promise to himself. He wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long time, he was willing to find out. James stood across the street from the Riverside Community Center, his hands in his pockets, as he observed the unassuming brick building. The cheerful shouts of children playing in the courtyard echoed faintly, mixing with the hum of passing cars. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what had drawn him here, beyond a vague sense of curiosity and perhaps the lingering echo of Anna's words from that morning. "It's struggling, but we're trying." Her voice had been steady, but he'd seen the flicker of worry in her eyes. It was a look he recognized, a quiet determination to persevere despite the odds. It struck him, uncomfortably so, that he hadn't seen that kind of resolve in years, not in his boardrooms, not among his peers. Taking a breath, James crossed the street and stepped through the front doors of the center. Inside, the air buzzed with activity. A group of teenagers sat at a folding table, sorting through stacks of donated books. Nearby, a woman in her 40s directed a young boy as he colored on a sheet of paper. The room smelled faintly of coffee and worn paper, and there was a comforting hum of voices that reminded James of the cafe. "Can I help you?" The question came from a woman approaching him from the far end of the room. She was tall, with greying hair pulled into a low bun and a sharp, assessing gaze. Despite her no-nonsense demeanor, there was a warmth to her voice that made James feel less like an outsider. "I'm just visiting," he replied, realizing how awkward it sounded the moment the words left his mouth. He cleared his throat, extending a hand. "James Whitmore. I heard about the center from Anna Bellamont." The woman's expression softened at Anna's name. She shook his hand firmly. Eleanor Rivers, director of the community centre. And you're right. Anna speaks highly of this place. It's practically her second home. James glanced around, noting the patched walls and the mismatched furniture. It seems like a lot of people depend on it. They do, Eleanor said, folding her arms. But we're facing some tough times. Rent's increasing, and donations haven't been enough to keep up. We're doing our best, but it feels like we're always one step behind. James nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. He could hear the unspoken plea in her voice, even though she didn't ask for anything outright. It must be hard, running something like this. It is, Eleanor admitted. But it's worth it. This place changes lives. Kids learning to read, adults getting their GEDs, families finding a sense of community. It's not something we can afford to lose. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, James considered offering help outright. But he hesitated, knowing his involvement would raise questions he wasn't ready to answer. Instead, he glanced toward a side door where Anna had just appeared, her face lighting up as she spotted him. "James," she called, crossing the room. "What are you doing here?" "I thought I'd see the place for myself," he said, his voice casual. "You talked about it, and I was curious." Anna smiled, a hint of surprise in her eyes. "Well, welcome to the heart of our community. Come on, I'll show you around." Anna led James down a narrow hallway, lined with bulletin boards covered in colourful flyers. Handwritten schedules for tutoring sessions, community potlucks and job training programs were pinned haphazardly, evidence of the centre's ever-changing needs. She walked with a familiar ease, greeting volunteers and students by name, her presence effortless yet grounding. James followed silently, his eyes taking in the small but meaningful details. The scuffed floors from years of foot traffic, the flickering overhead light that hadn't been replaced, the faded mural on the wall depicting a tree with names of past volunteers painted into its branches. This place wasn't just a building, it was a lifeline. And yet, it was barely holding together. Anna stopped at a door labelled Adult Literacy Program and gestured for James to step inside. The room was simple. Rows of second-hand desks, a whiteboard smudged with faint marker residue, and shelves filled with donated books in varying states of wear. At the front of the room, a middle-aged man hunched over a workbook, carefully tracing letters with a pencil. "This is Mr. Garvey," Anna said in a hushed voice. "He's been coming here for 6 months. He never learned to read when he was younger, but he's determined to change that." James watched as Mr. Garvey painstakingly copied words from a basic reading exercise, his lips moving as he sounded them out. The scene was humbling. In his world, success was measured in profit margins and market shares. Here, success was a retired bus driver finally learning to read a bedtime story to his granddaughter. James hadn't realized how long he'd been staring until Anna nudged him gently. "Want to meet him?" He hesitated, then nodded. Anna walked over first, her tone warm and encouraging. "Mr. Garvey, how's it going today?" The man looked up, his expression brightening. "Making progress, I think," he said, tapping his pencil on the workbook. "Tougher than driving a bus for 30 years, I'll tell you that much." Anna laughed. "You're doing great. Keep at it." She turned slightly toward James. "This is James Whitmore. He's interested in what we do here." Mr. Garvey squinted at James before offering a firm handshake. "Good to meet you, son. You looking to volunteer?" James wasn't sure how to answer. He'd never volunteered for anything in his life. His version of charity had always been writing checks, clean, distant, efficient. But standing here, in this room filled with quiet determination, he felt something shift. "I might be," he said, surprising even himself. Anna arched an eyebrow but said nothing. Instead, she turned back to Mr. Garvey. We'll let you get back to it. I'll check in on you later." As they stepped back into the hallway, James exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "This place is different from what I expected." Anna tilted her head. "Different how?" James hesitated. "It's real. People here aren't looking for handouts. They just need a chance." Anna studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "That's exactly why we fight so hard to keep it open." Something in the way she said we made James realize just how deeply connected she was to this place. And for the first time, he found himself wondering what it would feel like to be part of something like that. As they continued the tour, James felt a quiet resolve settle over him. He wasn't sure what he could do yet, but one thing was certain. He wasn't ready to walk away, not from this, and definitely not from Anna. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement as James stepped out of the community centre, his mind still processing everything he had seen. The conversations, the quiet determination in the people he had met, it was unlike anything he had experienced in years. He barely had time to gather his thoughts before Anna emerged beside him, slipping off her name tag and tucking it into her pocket. "So," she said, crossing her arms as she studied him. "What did you think?" James hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It's impressive," he admitted. "The work you're doing here, it's real. It matters." Anna smiled, but there was something guarded in her expression, as if she were waiting for him to say something else. When he didn't, she nodded. "It does matter, but it's getting harder to keep it going." James knew what she meant. The building was in desperate need of repairs, and from what Eleanor had said earlier, the financial situation was dire. "How much trouble are you really in?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Anna exhaled, glancing toward the street before answering. "The rent increase is only part of the problem. We've also lost some of our biggest donors. People mean well, but times are tough, and when businesses have to choose between staying afloat and making charitable donations, the choice is obvious." James's jaw tightened. He understood business, understood the cold reality of financial decisions. But what he had seen today, the people, their struggles, made it impossible to look at this as just another failing organization. Anna shifted her weight, rubbing her arms as if trying to shake off the worry. "We have a fundraiser coming up," she continued. "We're hoping it'll be enough to cover at least a few months of rent, maybe even get the building some much-needed repairs." A fundraiser? James had attended more of those than he could count. Glitzy events where millionaires bid on overpriced artwork while sipping champagne. But he doubted this would be anything like that. "You think it'll be enough?" he asked. Anna let out a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. "I don't know, James, but I have to believe it's worth trying." There was something in the way she said it that made his chest tighten. He had spent years making calculated decisions, never investing in anything unless he was certain of the outcome. But Anna didn't have that luxury. She was fighting for something without any guarantees, driven by hope alone. And for the first time in a long time, James wondered what it would feel like to do the same. James slipped his hands into his pockets, staring at the cracks in the sidewalk as Anna's words settled over him. Hope wasn't a strategy. Hope wasn't logical. And yet, standing here with her, he found himself wanting to believe in it. "I could help," he said before he even realized he was saying it. Anna turned to him, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" James hesitated. He wasn't ready to reveal who he really was. Not yet. If she knew he had more than enough money to save the center with a single check, would she see him differently? Would she assume he was just another rich man looking for a cause to make himself feel better? "I have connections," he said carefully. "I could reach out to a few people, see if they'd be willing to donate." It wasn't a lie, but it also wasn't the whole truth. Anna studied him for a moment, her brown eyes searching his face. Then, to his surprise, she smiled. "That would be really great, actually. We need all the help we can get." Relief flickered through him, though he wasn't sure why. "I mean it, James," she continued. "I don't know what you saw in there that made you want to help, but if you're serious, we could really use someone like you." James swallowed. He wasn't used to people needing him for anything other than business deals. It was strangely unsettling, but also something else, something he couldn't quite name. Before he could respond, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb and the driver stepped out to open the back door. James tensed instinctively as a man in an expensive navy suit emerged, his greying hair perfectly styled, his presence commanding without effort. Victor Langston. Anna's easy smile disappeared the moment she saw him. "What do you want, Victor?" she asked, her voice clipped. James watched as Victor adjusted his cufflinks, his lips curling into a practiced smirk. "Just checking in, Anna. I heard about the fundraiser. Admirable effort, really." Anna crossed her arms, her stance firm. "We don't need your approval." Victor chuckled. "No, but you do need money, and I'm here to offer a solution." James felt his fists clench. He had seen men like Victor before, powerful, arrogant, convinced that everything had a price. Anna's jaw tightened. "If this is another one of your offers, you already know my answer." Victor sighed, shaking his head. "Anna, I like you. I really do. But sentimentality doesn't keep the lights on. You could end all of this struggling right now. Sell me the property, and I'll make sure you and your volunteers are taken care of. No more fighting for scraps." James took a step forward before he could stop himself. "And what happens to the people who depend on this place?" Victor turned to him for the first time, his sharp gaze assessing. "And you are?" James held his stare, keeping his voice even. "Someone who actually cares about what happens here." Victor's smirk deepened. "Interesting. Well, whoever you are, you should know that this center's days are numbered. The question is whether Anna wants to walk away with something, or nothing." Anna lifted her chin. "I'd rather fight for something real than sell out for convenience." Victor sighed as if he were genuinely disappointed. "Suit yourself. But when the fundraiser fails and the bills pile up, don't say I didn't warn you." With that, he turned and slipped back into his car. The door shut with a soft click and the car pulled away, leaving a tense silence in its wake. James turned to Anna, expecting to see anger, but instead he saw something worse: doubt. "He's wrong," James said quietly. "This fundraiser won't fail." Anna let out a breath, nodding, but she didn't look convinced. James wasn't sure what had possessed him to say it with such certainty. But as he stood there beside her, watching the shadows of doubt creep into her expression, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let Victor Langston win. The next morning, James found himself back at Magnolia Cafe, sitting at his usual corner table with a cup of untouched coffee in front of him. He wasn't checking his emails, wasn't reading the financial news. Instead, he was thinking about Anna, about the community center, about Victor's smug certainty that their fundraiser would fail. It had been a long time since he cared about anything outside of his business empire. He had built his life around control, around minimizing risks and eliminating uncertainty. But now he was voluntarily stepping into a situation where the odds weren't in his favor, where success wasn't guaranteed. And yet, for the first time in years, the uncertainty didn't bother him. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the cafe door swinging open. Anna walked in, shaking off the morning chill, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail. When she spotted James, she hesitated for a fraction of a second before making her way toward him. "Morning," she greeted, her voice softer than usual. "Morning," he replied, She slid into the seat across from him, wrapping her hands around the cup of coffee she had just picked up from the counter. There was something different about her today. Her usual spark, the quiet confidence she carried even in the face of challenges, seemed dimmed. "You okay?" James asked. Anna let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "I don't know. I spent half the night running numbers, trying to figure out if we even stand a chance of making enough from this fundraiser." She exhaled, staring down at her coffee. "Victor has a point. Even if we raise some money, it might not be enough to keep the center running long term. What if we're just delaying the inevitable?" James leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "You can't think like that." She looked up at him, something unreadable in her expression. "How do you know? You're a business guy. You understand numbers. If this were any other situation, you'd probably say the same thing Victor did." James held her gaze. "Maybe. But this isn't just numbers, Anna. This is people. This is a place that means something. That's worth fighting for." She studied him for a long moment before letting out a slow breath. "I want to believe that. I really do." James hesitated, then made a decision. "Let me help," he said. Anna blinked, caught off guard. "James, you've already done enough. You've been supportive, and I appreciate it, but—" "I mean it," he cut in. "Let me help with the fundraiser. I know how to get people to invest in something. And whether you like it or not, this place is an investment, not in the financial sense, but in something bigger. The community, the people who rely on it." Anna bit her lip, considering his words. "You really think you can help?" James allowed himself a small, confident smile. "I know I can." Anna leaned back in her chair, studying James with an intensity that made him feel as though she was trying to see past his words, past whatever motivations she thought he might have. She had spent years relying only on herself, and James could see that accepting help, especially from someone like him, wasn't easy for her. Finally, she sighed. "All right," she said, crossing her arms. "If you're serious about helping, I'm not going to turn you down. But this isn't some high-profile charity gala, James. We don't have wealthy donors lined up, and we definitely don't have a ballroom with a 5-course meal and an auctioneer selling overpriced artwork." James smirked. "I figured as much." "We've been planning something simple," she continued. "A community festival, local businesses setting up booths, live music, a raffle, and a silent auction with donations from people around town." She hesitated. "But honestly, the numbers still aren't adding up. We need bigger sponsors, and we need more people to show up if we're going to hit our goal." James nodded. "Then that's where I come in." Anna arched an eyebrow. "And what exactly do you have in mind?" He leaned forward slightly. "You need sponsors. I know business owners who would jump at the chance to align themselves with a meaningful cause. You need more people to show up? I can help with marketing, promotion, things that go beyond word of mouth." Anna frowned. "That sounds expensive." "It won't be," James assured her. "I have contacts in marketing who owe me favors. We can get the word out without draining your budget." She tapped her fingers on the table, considering his offer. "And why are you doing this?" James hesitated, caught off guard by the directness of her question. He could have given her a smooth answer, something polished and vague, but instead he decided to tell the truth, at least part of it. "Because I believe in what you're doing," he said simply, "and because I don't like seeing people like Victor Langston think they can just buy their way into whatever they want." Anna studied him for a moment longer before finally nodding. "Okay," she said. "We'll take whatever help we can get." James exhaled, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction at her words. "Good," he said. "Then let's get to work." As they finished their coffee and started discussing the next steps, James couldn't shake the feeling that this, working with Anna, fighting for something real, was the first thing in a long time that had felt right, and that was both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of planning, meetings, and endless phone calls. True to his word, James leveraged his connections, reaching out to business owners, media contacts, and marketing firms. Some required convincing, others agreed immediately, and a few hesitated, until James subtly hinted that aligning their brand with a strong community initiative would be beneficial for them in the long run. Anna, meanwhile, worked tirelessly on her end. Between managing the cafe, coordinating with volunteers, and keeping up with her responsibilities at the community center, she barely had time to sleep. But James noticed something. No matter how exhausted she looked, no matter how many obstacles they encountered, she never let doubt take hold. She fought for this place, for these people, and the sheer force of her will made it impossible for James to treat this as just another business deal. Now, standing outside the community center with a clipboard in hand, Anna checked off the final list of sponsors. "Okay," she said, glancing up at James. "We've got the bakery donating pastries for the festival, a few local artists contributing pieces for the silent auction, and a band willing to play for free. That's the good news." James raised an eyebrow. "And the bad news?" Anna sighed. "We're still short on our fundraising goal. Even if everything goes perfectly, we might not raise enough to secure the center's future beyond the next few months." James glanced at the list, his mind already calculating. "We need a high-ticket item for the auction," he mused. "Something that will bring in serious bids." Anna gave him a skeptical look. "James, this isn't some black-tie charity event. We're not exactly auctioning off yachts or luxury vacations here." "No," James agreed, "but we don't have to. We just need something that feels exclusive." Anna thought for a moment, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "What about experiences? People love things they can't buy in stores. Maybe we get a well-known chef to offer a private dinner, or a musician to do a one-on-one session with a fan." James nodded, impressed. "That's a great angle. I'll see what I can pull together." Anna smiled, then paused, her expression turning more serious. "James, I know I gave you a hard time about this at first, but I just want to say thank you. I don't know why you're helping as much as you are, but I'm really glad you are." James hesitated. He could have told her the truth, that somewhere along the way, this stopped being about helping for the sake of doing the right thing and started being about her, about wanting to see her win. But instead, he simply nodded. "Let's just make sure we pull this off," he said. Anna held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, let's." Over the next few days, James threw himself into the fundraiser preparations with a level of focus he usually reserved for multi-million-dollar business deals. He made calls, pulled strings, and secured commitments from people who otherwise would have ignored a small community event. A local vineyard agreed to donate a private wine-tasting experience. A renowned Charleston chef volunteered to host an exclusive dinner, and even a former college football star offered a signed jersey and a meet-and-greet session. Anna, meanwhile, was handling everything on the ground. She coordinated volunteers, confirmed vendor participation, and ensured the community center was prepared to host the event. Every night, James would meet her at the cafe or the center to check in on their progress. Their conversations were still filled with strategy and logistics, but something had changed between them, a quiet understanding, an unspoken rhythm. One evening, as they went over the final auction items in the community center's main hall, Anna set down her clipboard with a sigh. "I think this is the first time I've stopped moving all day," she admitted, rubbing her temples. James smirked. "You should pace yourself. The fundraiser hasn't even started yet." Anna gave him a tired smile. "You sound like Eleanor. She keeps telling me to take breaks, but I feel like if I stop for even a second, everything will fall apart. James leaned against one of the tables, watching her carefully. That's not true, and you know it. You have a team. You're not doing this alone. She exhaled, tilting her head slightly. I know, it's just, this place means everything to me. I can't let it slip away. There it was, the weight she had been carrying, the quiet fear she rarely voiced. James had spent his life around people who only cared about money, people who measured success in numbers and acquisitions. But Anna cared about something real, something bigger than herself. And for the first time in a long time, James wanted to fight for something that wasn't about profit margins. You won't, he said firmly. Not if I have anything to do with it. Anna studied him for a long moment, as if trying to figure him out. Then she let out a soft laugh. You really don't give up, do you? James shrugged, his smirk returning. Not when something's worth it. Before Anna could respond, the door to the hall creaked open, and Eleanor stepped in, her expression unreadable. We have a problem, she said, her voice tight. James and Anna exchanged a quick glance before turning to Eleanor. What kind of problem? Anna asked. Eleanor sighed. Victor Langston just announced he's hosting a competing fundraiser the same night as ours, at one of the biggest venues in Charleston. James felt his jaw tighten. Of course, Victor wasn't going to play fair. Anna ran a hand through her hair, frustration evident in her posture. That, she exhaled sharply. That's low, even for him. Eleanor nodded. He's targeting the same donors we were hoping to attract. If he pulls enough of them away, we could be in serious trouble. James clenched his fists. This wasn't just a business tactic, this was sabotage. Anna turned to him, her eyes filled with worry. What do we do? James met her gaze, his resolve hardening. We fight back. James didn't waste time. As soon as Eleanor left, he pulled out his phone and started making calls. If Victor Langston wanted to play dirty, then James would make sure their fundraiser not only survived, but thrived. He had spent years navigating high-stakes business deals, outmaneuvering competitors who thought they held all the cards. This wasn't any different, except this time it wasn't about profit. It was about something real. Anna paced beside him, arms crossed tightly over her chest. I should have seen this coming, she muttered. Victor doesn't like losing. I should have known he'd try to undercut us. James lowered his phone after finishing a call with a local journalist. You couldn't have predicted this, Anna. And it doesn't change the fact that we're still in this fight. She exhaled sharply, rubbing her forehead. But if we lose major donors, we won't, James cut in. Victor's event might have money behind it, but it doesn't have heart. It's a networking event disguised as charity. What we have is something people actually care about. Anna stopped pacing, looking at him. So what's the plan? James leaned against one of the tables, his mind already working through possibilities. First, we control the narrative. I just got off the phone with a few reporters. There's going to be a story in tomorrow's paper about the history of the community center and why this fundraiser matters. We make sure people know that our event isn't about luxury. It's about keeping a vital resource alive. Anna blinked, clearly impressed. That's actually smart. James smirked. Glad you're finally realizing that. She rolled her eyes, but couldn't hide the smile tugging at her lips. We also need to make our fundraiser the place to be, James continued. I'll reach out to more people, pull in some names that will get attention. Local celebrities, influencers, people who can draw a crowd. Anna hesitated. I don't want to turn this into a spectacle. We won't, James assured her. We'll keep the focus where it belongs, on the center. But we do need people talking about it. The more buzz we create, the harder it'll be for Victor to steal our momentum. Anna took a deep breath, then nodded. All right, let's do it. James tapped his phone screen, ready to make more calls. Then we better move fast. We've got a fundraiser to win. The next 24 hours were a blur of activity. James used every resource at his disposal, calling in favors and leveraging connections that even he hadn't expected to use for something like this. He secured a feature in a popular Charleston lifestyle magazine, arranged for a well-known chef to provide catering, and convinced a respected former mayor to attend as a guest speaker. Anna, meanwhile, focused on the heart of the fundraiser, rallying volunteers, coordinating with vendors, and making sure that every detail aligned with their original vision. She refused to let the event turn into something flashy and impersonal, even as the excitement around it grew. By the evening before the event, they gathered in the main hall of the community center, surrounded by rows of tables already set up for the auction and local food vendors. The space buzzed with last-minute preparations, and despite the exhaustion in her posture, Anna looked more determined than ever. Eleanor walked in, holding up her phone. "You might want to see this," she said, handing it to Anna. Anna frowned as she read the article on the screen. James stepped closer, reading over her shoulder. Langston's exclusive charity gala, a night of elegance and philanthropy. The article painted Victor's event as the place to be, highlighting its elite guest list, extravagant entertainment, and high-profile auction items. There was even a quote from Victor himself. "We believe in supporting Charleston's future. Our event isn't just about fundraising, it's about bringing together the city's most influential figures to create real change." Anna lowered the phone, shaking her head. "Unbelievable." "He's trying to drown us out," Eleanor said. "Make our event look small in comparison." James let out a short, humorless laugh. "Let him try. The people coming to our event aren't here for champagne and status. They're here because they actually care." Anna sighed, rubbing her temples. "I just hope it's enough." James turned to her, his expression serious. "It will be. Because unlike Victor, we're not just putting on a show. We're giving people a reason to believe in something." Anna met his gaze, and for the first time since Victor's announcement, the doubt in her eyes faded. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Then let's make tomorrow count." As they locked up the center for the night, James felt something he hadn't in a long time: anticipation. Tomorrow wasn't just a fundraiser. It was a fight for something worth protecting, and he wasn't about to lose. The day of the fundraiser arrived with the crisp, invigorating air of early autumn. The sun cast a golden glow over the Riverside Community Center as volunteers set up tables, arranged silent auction items, and strung fairy lights around the outdoor courtyard. The place had been transformed overnight. Colorful banners hung above the entrance, and the scent of fresh-baked goods from local vendors filled the air. The energy was palpable, a mix of excitement and nerves coursing through everyone involved. James arrived early, dressed in a fitted navy suit that was polished but not ostentatious. He had spent the morning making sure last-minute details were locked in, calling vendors, confirming media coverage, and ensuring that some of the city's most influential figures were still on board. As he stepped onto the event grounds, he spotted Anna across the courtyard, her hair swept back in a simple yet elegant style, a clipboard tucked under one arm. She was moving through the space with purpose, checking in with volunteers, double-checking auction items, and stopping to greet guests as they started trickling in. When she turned and saw him, her expression softened for a moment before shifting into something unreadable. She made her way toward him, stopping just a few feet away. "You clean up well," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. James smirked. "Figured I'd try to look respectable if I'm going to be charming donors out of their wallets tonight." Anna let out a quiet laugh, but quickly sobered. Everything looks amazing. I can't believe we pulled this off. We're not done yet, James reminded her. The real work starts now. She nodded, glancing around at the growing crowd. I just hope people actually show up. As if on cue, a group of well-dressed attendees walked through the entrance, chatting amongst themselves as they surveyed the event. James recognized a few of them, business owners he had personally convinced to attend. Behind them, more guests arrived in steady waves. The local press was already snapping photos near the entrance, capturing the turnout. Anna exhaled, relief flickering across her face. Maybe this is actually going to work. James followed her gaze, his expression unreadable. It's not just going to work, he said. It's going to be better than anything Langston put together. Anna arched an eyebrow. You sound awfully confident. He met her gaze, a slow smile forming. I don't like to lose. Before she could respond, Eleanor approached them, her phone in hand, her expression tight. We have a problem, she said in a low voice. Anna's posture stiffened. What is it? Eleanor hesitated, then turned her phone screen toward them. A live video feed showed Victor Langston standing in a lavish ballroom, speaking to a crowd of well-dressed donors. Behind him, a massive banner read, Charleston's premier charity gala for the future. James clenched his jaw as Victor's smooth voice carried through the speakers. While other efforts are admirable, real change comes from real power. Tonight we're not just raising money, we're shaping the future of Charleston. Anna's grip tightened on her clipboard. He's trying to make us look insignificant. James narrowed his eyes. Then let's make sure he fails. James didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to one of his media contacts, making sure they shifted their coverage focus toward their event rather than Victor's spectacle. If Langston wanted to play dirty, James would make sure the real story, the one about people, not just money, was what the city remembered. Anna, however, looked shaken. She had put everything into this fundraiser, and now Victor was trying to overshadow it before it even had a chance to succeed. James stepped closer, lowering his voice. Look at this place, Anna. Look at the people who showed up. This isn't just about money. It's about them, and that's something Victor will never have. She exhaled slowly, nodding. You're right. Then, as if flipping a switch, she straightened her shoulders and turned to Eleanor. We stick to our plan. No distractions. People came here because they care about the community center, and that's what we focus on. Eleanor smiled approvingly. That's what I like to hear. As the evening progressed, the fundraiser gained momentum. The local band played lively jazz, children ran between booths collecting treats, and people enthusiastically bid on silent auction items. James moved through the crowd effortlessly, making connections, introducing guests to one another, and ensuring that donors felt engaged. Then, the real moment of the night arrived, Anna's speech. She stood on the small stage in the courtyard, the lights casting a warm glow on her face. The crowd quieted as she took a steadying breath, then spoke. I grew up believing that a single act of kindness can change a life, she began, her voice carrying through the space. For years, this community center has been that act of kindness for so many. It's given people a second chance, a place to learn, to grow, to belong, and now it needs us to fight for it. James watched as people leaned in, truly listening. Anna wasn't just making a speech, she was connecting. This wasn't rehearsed, wasn't polished for the sake of appearances. It was real, and that was more powerful than any flashy gala Victor could throw. By the time the auction began, donations were pouring in. People weren't just bidding, they were investing in the future of the community center. James could see it in their eyes, in the way they spoke to one another, in the energy that filled the air. Then, just as Anna stepped off stage, Eleanor rushed over, her face lit with excitement. "We did it," she whispered. "We hit our goal." Anna's breath caught. "Are you serious?" Eleanor nodded. And then some. James saw the disbelief in Anna's expression turn into something else. Relief, joy, maybe even something close to hope. And for the first time that night, he let himself feel it too. Victor Langston had tried to bury them, but they had done more than survive. They had won. The energy from the fundraiser still lingered in the air the next morning as Anna stood in the now quiet community centre. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting a golden glow over the tables still covered with decorations and leftover flyers. The place felt different, not just because they had secured the funds they needed, but because, for the first time in months, hope didn't feel like a fragile thing. She ran a hand along the edge of one of the tables, exhaling slowly. They had done it. Against all odds, against Victor Langston's attempt to overshadow them, they had won. The sound of the front door opening pulled her from her thoughts. She turned just as James stepped inside, his usual composed demeanor softened by something quieter, something almost hesitant. "You're here early," she said, crossing her arms with a small smile. James shrugged. "Figured I'd check in, see how you were holding up." Anna let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "I should be exhausted, but I think I'm still running on adrenaline." James nodded, stepping further inside. He took in the remnants of the night before, the banners, the empty donation jars, the scattered chairs. "You should be proud," he said. "That speech you gave? That's what made the difference." Anna glanced down, warmth creeping into her cheeks. "I don't know about that." "I do," James said firmly. "People don't give because of numbers. They give because of belief, and you made them believe." There was something in the way he said it that made Anna's chest tighten, something raw, unguarded. For a man who always seemed to have the perfect response, the perfectly measured tone, this moment felt real. She cleared her throat, shifting slightly. "Well, I wasn't the only one making things happen. She paused, hesitating. "James, I never asked why you got so involved in all of this. Not just the fundraiser, but everything." James held her gaze, and for the first time she saw the flicker of conflict behind his usually unreadable expression. It was as if he was standing on the edge of something, debating whether to step forward or turn back. Finally, he exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Because I wanted to," he admitted. "Because it mattered." Anna frowned slightly. "But why?" James hesitated, then looked away, his jaw tightening. "Because for a long time I told myself that caring, really caring, was just an opening for disappointment. But then I met you and this place, and it made me realize that maybe I was wrong." Anna's breath caught. Before she could respond, the front door swung open again, and Eleanor rushed in, her face tight with concern. "We have a problem," she said quickly. Anna's stomach sank. "What is it?" Eleanor glanced between her and James. "Victor Langston isn't done yet. He just made a counteroffer to buy the building outright, from the owner." Anna felt the floor tilt beneath her. "What?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor nodded grimly. "I just got off the phone with the building owner. Victor offered to buy the entire property, cash, well above market value. If the owner accepts, the community centre will be gone." A heavy silence settled over the room. The victory from last night had felt so absolute, so final. Now, in the harsh light of day, it was slipping through their fingers. James's expression hardened, his mind already calculating. Did the owner say anything? Are they considering it? Eleanor exhaled. "They didn't say outright, but they'd be fools not to. It's a huge offer, James. Money that could set them up for life. Anna clenched her fists. After everything? After all the people who showed up last night, who believed in this place? Her voice shook with anger. Victor doesn't care about this community. He just wants to win. James's jaw tightened. Then we don't give him that satisfaction. Anna looked at him, desperate for a solution. How? We barely pulled off the fundraiser. We don't have the kind of money to match that offer. James hesitated for only a fraction of a second. He could stop this. He had more than enough wealth to counter Victor's move. But the moment he did, everything would change. Anna would know who he really was. Not just a business-savvy professor willing to help, but a billionaire with the power to fix things with a single check. Would she still look at him the same way? Anna misread his silence as uncertainty. James, if you have an idea, please. He inhaled sharply, making his decision. I'll handle it. Anna blinked. What do you mean? James pulled out his phone. I mean, I'm not letting Victor win. Let me talk to the building owner. There's more to a deal than just money. Eleanor gave him a curious glance but didn't question him. Anna, however, still looked unconvinced. James, she started, if you... But he was already stepping away, dialing a number. As he walked toward the door, his voice steady and composed, Anna felt a strange mix of relief and unease. She had trusted James from the moment he started helping with the fundraiser. But now, for the first time, she wondered, who exactly had she put her trust in? James stepped out into the crisp morning air, phone pressed tightly to his ear as it rang. His mind was already strategizing, calculating the angles, the possible outcomes. He had spent years closing deals, outmaneuvering competitors, and ensuring that no one ever had leverage over him. This was no different. A gruff voice answered on the third ring. This is Alan Grayson. James recognized the name immediately. Grayson, the owner of the community center's building. A businessman, not a philanthropist. A man who would sell to whoever gave him the best offer. Mr. Grayson, this is James Whitmore. There was a pause. James knew the moment Grayson made the connection. His real identity, not the quiet finance professor he had let Anna believe he was. Well, Grayson said, interest piqued. I wasn't expecting a call from you. James got straight to the point. I understand you've received an offer from Victor Langston for the property. Grayson let out a small chuckle. News travels fast. It does, James said evenly. I'm offering you a better deal. Another pause. Then Grayson exhaled. Look, Whitmore, I don't doubt you've got the money, but this isn't about a bidding war. Langston's offer is clean. Cash up front, no strings attached. I don't have time for complications. James's grip on his phone tightened. I can match Langston's offer and give you something he can't. Grayson hummed, intrigued. I'm listening. James glanced back at the community center, his jaw tightening. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to end Victor's control over this city's development. You own several properties in Charleston, James continued, his voice measured, including commercial spaces that could use redevelopment. I have the resources to make those projects happen. You take my deal, and I'll ensure those properties get the investment they need. Grayson was silent for a long moment. Then he let out a low chuckle. You're good, Whitmore, but tell me, why do you care about this place? James hesitated, just for a second. Then he said simply, because some things are worth protecting. Another pause. Then Grayson exhaled through the receiver. I'll think about it. James knew what that meant. Grayson was weighing his options, seeing who could give him the better long-term benefit. It wasn't a win yet, but it was a foothold. Don't take too long, James warned. Langston doesn't care about this place. I do. He hung up before Grayson could respond. Taking a deep breath, James turned back toward the community center, but he stopped short when he saw Anna standing in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him carefully. She had heard enough. His stomach tightened as she took a slow step forward, her eyes filled with questions. "James," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Who are you?" James felt the weight of Anna's gaze, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure what to say. He had spent his life controlling narratives, ensuring that no one ever saw more of him than he allowed. But standing here, with Anna looking at him like he was a stranger, he realized he was out of time. She stepped closer, her arms still crossed, but there was something else now, something raw, almost hesitant. "I've trusted you, James. From the moment you walked into that cafe, from the moment you said you wanted to help." She shook her head. "But you just spoke to Alan Grayson like someone with power, someone who isn't just a finance professor helping out a small community center." James exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He could try to spin this, find a half-truth that would keep things simple, but he was tired of half-truths. "I never lied to you," he said carefully, "but I didn't tell you everything." Anna's expression hardened. "Then tell me now." James met her gaze, knowing this was the moment everything shifted. "I own Whitmore Industries. I built one of the largest tech investment firms in the country." He let the words settle, watching as Anna's jaw tightened, her hands gripping her arms a little tighter. "I'm not just some businessman with connections. I have the resources to buy this building outright, to make sure Victor Langston never gets his hands on it." Silence stretched between them. Anna's expression didn't change right away, but James could see the thoughts racing behind her eyes, the realization, the betrayal, the anger. "So what?" she said finally, her voice quiet but sharp. "This has been some kind of game for you? A way to prove you could fix everything with your money?" James shook his head. "Number. It was never about that." Anna let out a bitter laugh, stepping back. "Then what was it about? Because from where I'm standing it looks an awful lot like you tested me, like you wanted to see if I was worth helping before you decided to swoop in and play hero." James's chest tightened. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" she shot back. "You could have saved us from the beginning. You could have told me the truth. Instead, you let me believe we were in this together. You let me think you were one of us." Her voice broke slightly on the last words, and James felt something inside him twist. He had never cared what people thought of him. Until now. Until Anna. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want this to be about my money," he admitted. "I wanted to help because it mattered. Because you matter." Anna looked away, her jaw clenched. "I don't know if I can believe that." James took a step forward, but she took a step back. That hurt more than he expected. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to figure out if any of this was ever real." James wanted to say something, to fix it, but for the first time in his life, there was nothing he could do. Anna turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in front of the community center, the very place he had fought to save. And now, for the first time, he wasn't sure if he had lost the one thing that mattered most. The days following Anna's discovery were marked by an unbearable silence. James found himself back at Magnolia Cafe each morning, but the atmosphere had shifted. Anna no longer approached his table with that easy smile. Instead, she kept her distance, her eyes avoiding his as if the space between them was a chasm too wide to bridge. James hated it. Hated that his attempts to protect her, to prove that he was more than just a billionaire with deep pockets, had backfired so catastrophically. He thought that by withholding his wealth, he was offering her something real. But he realized now that truth was the only real thing he could have given her, and he had failed. Each morning he waited, hoping she would look his way, give him some sign that there was still a chance to explain. But each morning ended with him leaving the cafe alone, the unspoken words heavy in the air. It was Eleanor who finally broke the silence. She showed up at his office one afternoon, her expression set in the kind of determination that brooked no argument. "Are you really going to let Victor Langston win?" she asked, bypassing his assistant and closing the door behind her. James looked up from his desk, the piles of contracts and reports suddenly seeming trivial. "I'm not letting him win anything." "Then do something," Eleanor pressed. "Anna might be hurt, but she still cares about this place. And you're the only one who can make sure we keep it." James clenched his fists. "I've already spoken to Grayson. I made him a better offer. It's just a matter of time." Eleanor shook her head. "It's not just about the building, James. It's about Anna. You're trying to save this place without considering what she's losing in the process." He exhaled sharply, the weight of her words settling over him. "I never wanted to hurt her." "Then prove it," Eleanor said quietly. "Don't just buy this place for her. Fight for it with her." James stared at the stack of documents on his desk, the numbers and figures blurring together. For the first time, they felt meaningless. "What do you suggest?" "Come to the community meeting tonight," she said firmly. "Show the people there that this isn't just another acquisition for you. Show them and Anna that you're willing to stand with us." James hesitated, his instincts fighting against the idea of public exposure. He was a man who operated behind closed doors, not in front of crowds. But then he thought of Anna's face when she had confronted him, the betrayal in her eyes, and knew that some things were worth stepping out of the shadows for. "All right," he agreed finally. "I'll be there." That evening, the community center was packed with residents, volunteers, and local business owners. The energy in the room was tense, every whispered conversation laced with fear and uncertainty. James stood at the back, watching as Eleanor addressed the crowd, her voice steady but urgent. "We've come so far," Eleanor said, her eyes sweeping over the room. "We raised enough money to keep the center open for a few more months. But Victor Langston isn't giving up. He wants to buy this building and turn it into luxury condos." A murmur of anger rippled through the crowd. James scanned the faces around him, parents clutching their children's hands, elderly residents leaning on canes, teenagers with wary eyes. They were the people Anna had been fighting for, the ones who stood to lose the most. Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger. "But we have one more chance. If we can raise enough to make a competitive offer, we can buy this building ourselves. We can protect it from developers like Langston." Anna stood near the front, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The fire that usually defined her had dimmed, replaced by a flicker of doubt. James knew it was his turn to speak. His heart pounded as he moved to the front, the eyes of the room following him with curiosity and suspicion. When he reached the center, he paused, searching for the right words, words that weren't wrapped in business jargon or financial strategy, words that were simply honest. "I'm not from here," he began, his voice carrying through the hall. "I don't have the history with this place that you all do, but in the time I've spent here, I've seen something rare, something I thought didn't exist anymore. I've seen a community that doesn't just talk about change but fights for it." He glanced at Anna, her eyes fixed on him, unreadable. "When I first came to the community center, it was just a building to me. But now I see it for what it is, a lifeline, a place where people find hope, where they learn, grow, and support each other." James took a breath, the vulnerability of the moment sharper than he anticipated. "I could have written a check. I could have bought this building outright and walked away. But that's not what this community needs. It needs people willing to stand together, to fight together." A murmur of agreement rose from the crowd. James looked directly at Anna. "I'm not here to play the hero. I'm here because this place, because you, made me believe in something again." Anna's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "So, I'm asking you," James continued, addressing the crowd once more. "Stand with me. Let's show Victor Langston and anyone else who thinks they can buy this community that we won't be sold off. Let's raise the rest of what we need and own this place ourselves." The room erupted into applause, a surge of energy and determination spreading through the crowd. James felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of fear, of doubt, finally unraveling. As people began pledging donations and brainstorming fundraising ideas, James stepped back, the weight of the moment settling over him. Anna approached him slowly, the tension between them lessening with each step. "You really mean that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James nodded, his eyes locked with hers. "I do." For a moment they stood there, the noise of the crowd fading into the background. And then, just as James began to think he might have a chance to rebuild what he had broken, Anna spoke again. "We have a lot of work to do." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start, and for now, that was enough. As the meeting continued, the energy in the room grew more electric. People who had once hesitated to get involved were now stepping forward, pledging donations, offering services, and brainstorming new ways to fundraise. It wasn't just about saving the community center anymore, it was about proving that they had the power to fight for what was theirs. James watched as Anna moved through the crowd, speaking to volunteers, answering questions, and offering reassurances where she could. Even now, even with the weight of everything she had been through, she remained at the heart of it all. Eleanor approached him, arms crossed, a knowing look in her eyes. "That was a hell of a speech," she said. James smirked. "You did say to prove it." She chuckled. "I did. And I think you just might have." His gaze flickered back to Anna. "I hope so." Eleanor followed his line of sight, her expression softening. "Give her time, James. She's been fighting for so long, she doesn't know how to let someone else fight beside her. But she sees what you did tonight. That means something." James nodded, the weight of Eleanor's words settling over him. He wasn't naive enough to think that one speech had fixed everything, but it was a step in the right direction. As the meeting wrapped up, people began trickling out, discussing plans for the next fundraiser, exchanging contact information, and promising to be back in the morning. The center had felt like it was on the brink of collapse just days ago, but now it was alive with possibility. James lingered near the entrance, waiting as Anna finished speaking with an older couple. When she finally turned toward him, her expression was unreadable. "Walk with me?" she asked. He nodded without hesitation. They stepped outside into the cool night air, the distant hum of the city filling the silence between them. For a while neither of them spoke. They just walked, the tension between them shifting into something quieter, something less raw. Finally, Anna let out a breath. "When I first met you, I thought you were just another guy passing through. Someone who didn't understand what it meant to need a place like this." James didn't interrupt. He let her speak. "But then you stayed," she continued, her voice softer now. "You got involved. You helped. And I started to trust you." She stopped walking, turning to face him. Her eyes searched his, and James felt something inside him tighten. "I don't know how to reconcile that with the fact that you kept something so huge from me," she admitted. "I want to believe that this—" She gestured between them, "that it wasn't just some kind of test for you, that you weren't waiting to see if I was worthy of your help." James stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "Anna, I swear to you, that's not what this was." She studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I believe you." Relief flooded through him, but before he could say anything, she continued. But that doesn't mean I can forget overnight, she said. It doesn't mean I can just pretend none of this hurt. James swallowed hard. I wouldn't expect you to. Anna exhaled, as if releasing some of the weight she'd been carrying. Then let's do this. Let's save the center, together. And after that, we'll see. James knew it wasn't everything. It wasn't an easy fix, wasn't a promise of forgiveness or of a future between them. But it was hope. And for now, that was enough. The weeks that followed were filled with an intensity that neither James nor Anna had ever experienced before. The fight for the community center had shifted from a desperate struggle into something powerful, something unstoppable. Every day brought new developments. The fundraiser money had given them momentum, but it wasn't enough on its own. They needed more, and the community rose to the challenge. Local businesses pitched in, hosting smaller fundraisers, donating a percentage of their sales, and spreading the word. Volunteers went door to door, gathering support. And through it all, James and Anna worked side by side. It wasn't easy. There were late nights, moments of frustration, and more than a few arguments over strategy. Anna still had walls up when it came to trusting James fully again, but she didn't shut him out. She let him be there, let him fight alongside her. And James. He had never been more invested in anything in his life. Then came the final piece of the puzzle, Grayson's decision. James received the call first. He had been in his office, staring at the skyline of Charleston, when his phone buzzed. He answered immediately. Mr. Whitmore? Alan Grayson's voice came through the line, calm and measured. I've made my decision. James gripped the edge of his desk. And? I'm selling the building, Grayson said. To you. Relief surged through James, but he forced himself to remain steady. What changed your mind? You did, Grayson admitted. Victor Langston can throw money at problems, but you offered something more. A real investment, not just in the property, but in the people. That's the kind of legacy I'd rather be part of. James exhaled slowly, letting the weight of those words sink in. You won't regret it. I hope not, Grayson said. I'll have my lawyers send over the final paperwork. When James hung up, he didn't waste a second. He grabbed his jacket and headed straight for the community center. Anna was outside, helping a group of volunteers hang a new sign when he arrived. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Hey, she greeted, then frowned at the look on his face. What's wrong? James didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled the contract from his jacket and handed it to her. Anna took it cautiously, her eyes scanning the words. Slowly, her breath hitched. She looked up at him, wide-eyed. James, is this? It's ours, he said quietly. The center, the building, it's safe. For a moment, Anna just stared at him, as if she couldn't process what she was holding. Then, with a sharp inhale, she clutched the paper to her chest. They had won. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. You did it, she whispered. James shook his head. We did it. A laugh bubbled out of her, wet with emotion. She glanced around at the people who had fought for this place, the people who had believed in it. Then, in one swift motion, she closed the space between them and threw her arms around him. James stiffened for only a fraction of a second before he melted into the embrace, his arms wrapping tightly around her. For the first time in a long time, he let himself feel it, all of it. The weight of the fight, the relief of victory, and the realization that he had found something worth holding on to, and he wasn't letting go. The celebration that followed was unlike anything the community had ever seen. News of the victory spread like wildfire, and within hours people began gathering at the center. Volunteers, students, families, and even business owners who had supported their fight. The once dim hall now glowed with warmth and laughter, filled with the people who had refused to let their homes slip away. Eleanor stood on stage, trying and failing to keep the crowd quiet as she addressed them. All right, settle down, everyone, she called over the noise, though the smile on her face betrayed how little she minded the chaos. Tonight, we celebrate what we built together, because make no mistake, this wasn't saved by one person. It wasn't saved by money alone. It was saved by all of us. A thunderous round of applause erupted. Anna, standing beside James, clapped along, her eyes shining as she scanned the room. Everywhere she looked, she saw people embracing, laughing, holding on to something they had almost lost. James leaned in slightly, his voice low so only she could hear. Told you we'd win. Anna turned to him, her lips quirking upward. Yeah, she murmured. You did. She still wasn't sure where they stood, what this was between them. But in that moment, she allowed herself to simply be in it, to enjoy the victory without the weight of unanswered questions. Eleanor lifted her hands, calling for quiet again. And of course, there's one person we have to hear from tonight. She turned toward Anna, her smile full of pride. Come on, sweetheart. Say a few words. The crowd erupted into cheers, urging her forward. Anna let out a breath, shaking her head. I didn't plan a speech. Eleanor smirked. You never do. That's why we love you. James nudged her playfully. Go on, he said, his voice softer now. They want to hear from you. Anna hesitated for only a second before stepping onto the stage. As the noise died down, she looked out at the people in front of her, the people who had fought beside her, who had believed even when she had almost lost faith herself. I don't know what to say, she admitted, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Except, thank you. For believing in this place, for showing up, for reminding me that when we fight for something bigger than ourselves, we win. Another roar of applause filled the hall, and Anna let herself soak in the moment. Then her eyes found James's. He stood at the edge of the stage, hands in his pockets, watching her with something unreadable in his expression. But she didn't need words to understand what he was thinking. This wasn't just about the center anymore. This was about them. As the celebration continued, James eventually slipped outside, needing a moment of quiet. The night air was cool, a stark contrast to the warmth inside. He had just taken a breath when he heard footsteps behind him. Anna. She came to stand beside him, arms crossed over her chest. Leaving your own victory party? James smirked. Just taking a minute. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of unspoken things, of everything they had yet to say. Finally, Anna turned to face him. You could have bought the center outright the moment you heard it was in trouble. James met her gaze. I could have. Why didn't you? She asked softly. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Because I didn't just want to save it, Anna. I wanted to earn it. She studied him, something shifting in her expression. You did. James wasn't sure who moved first, but suddenly she was stepping closer and he was reaching for her. And then, finally, she kissed him. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was quiet, like the moment after a long storm, like the first deep breath after holding it for too long. It was right. When they pulled apart, Anna let out a breathless laugh. Took you long enough? James smirked, his forehead resting against hers. You were worth the wait. Inside, the celebration continued, but out here, in the cool Charleston night, they had found something even greater than victory. They had found each other. And for the first time in a long time, James Whitmore knew exactly where he belonged.